Kindness is a dangerous thing to give a stranger. It asks for nothing, and it changes everything, and once it is done, it can never be taken back. When a poor healer dragged a freezing man out of a blizzard and laid him beside her fire, she believed she was saving a traveler who would be gone by morning. She did not know. She had opened her door to the Duke the whole county prayed never to meet. She did not know what that one small mercy would come to cost her. The snow had been falling since noon, and by dusk it had buried the world that Linnet Carrow knew. She stood at the one small window of her cottage on the shoulder of Caldfell and watched the last gray light drain out of the valley below. The beck that ran past her door had gone silent beneath its skin of ice. The dree-stone walls that climbed the fell had vanished into the white. There was only the snow, and the wind, and the long, low moan the wind made as it came down off the high tops, and threw itself against her walls as though it meant to have her out of her own house. She was 24, though the last hard year had put an age on her that her face did not yet show. Her hands were chapped and red from the cold and from the endless small labors of keeping one person alive through a fell winter alone. Her gown was brown wool gone soft with washing and patched at both elbows, and beneath it she wore every other stitch she owned. The fire on her hearth was small and careful, for peat was dear, and she had cut what little she could before the first frosts hardened the ground against her spade. She fed it one dark brick, and watched the flame catch, and she did not let herself count how few bricks were left in the stack beside the door. Her grandmother had died in the autumn quietly, in the box bed in the corner where Linnet now slept alone. The old woman had been the healer of the valley for 40 years, and Linnet had learned the whole of it at her knee, which leaf to steep and which to burn, how to set a bone and draw a fever, and coax a stubborn child into the world on a bad night. The valley folk still came to her door when their need grew great enough to outweigh their fear, for they had always been half afraid of the women in this cottage, with their jars and their strange, quiet knowing. They came for her cures, and they crossed themselves when they left. It was a lonely way to be needed, but it was the only way she had ever known, and she did not weep over it, because weeping changed nothing and wasted salt. She was turning from the window to bank the fire for the night when she saw it. Out on the white slope where the track came over the shoulder of the fell before, it dropped away toward Nethercot. Something dark lay against the snow. At first she took it for a fallen ewe, for the drifts played such tricks in this light, and more than one beast had been lost on that track in weather like this. She almost let the curtain fall. She almost turned back to her warm hearth and her narrow bed and the long, safe silence of her own four walls. Then the dark shape moved. It was not a ewe, it was a man. He had come perhaps 20 yards down from the crest, and there he had gone down onto his knees, and as she watched, he pitched slowly forward into the drift and did not rise again. The snow began at once to gather on the back of him, patient and white and terrible, the way it gathers on a thing that has stopped fighting. Linnet stood very still. Her heart was knocking hard against her ribs. She knew what the fell did to a man left out on a night like this one. She had helped to carry in more than one who had not been found in time, blue and stiff, and past all her grandmother's art. And she knew, too, the plain, hard arithmetic of her own life. A woman alone did not open her door to a strange man in the dark. Every soul in the valley would have told her so. There was no one within 2 miles to hear her if she cried out, and nothing but a slip of a bolt between her and whatever walked in out of that storm. She looked at the fire. She looked at the shape in the snow, already going soft and shapeless under the falling white. Then she reached for her cloak. The cold took the breath out of her the instant she stepped past her own threshold. The wind drove the snow flat into her face and found every gap in her wool, and by the time she had fought her way up the slope to the fallen man, her skirts were heavy with ice, and her feet had gone from aching to nothing at all. She dropped to her knees beside him. He was a big man, far bigger than she was, lying face down with one arm flung out, as though he had been reaching for something at the very last. She worked both hands into the sodden weight of his cloak and heaved, and it took all of her strength to roll him onto his back. He was alive. Barely. His lips had gone the color of a bruise, and there was a crust of frozen blood above one dark brow. But when she pressed her fingers to the cold hollow of his throat, she found it there, faint and far too slow. The beat of a heart that had all but given up its argument with the night. She had no breath to spare on wondering how he had come to be here. She hooked her hands beneath his arms and pulled. He was a dead weight of soaked wool and frozen muscle, and twice she went down hard in the snow and had to haul herself up with her lungs afire. She talked to him the whole while, low and steady, the way she would gentle a laboring ewe or a frightened child. "Come on then," she said. "Come on. Not tonight. You do not get to die on my doorstep tonight." Down the slope she dragged him, one heaving step, and then the next, the lit square of her open door swinging closer through the white. She got him over the threshold and let him down as gently as her failing arms allowed onto the flags before the fire. Then she set her whole weight against the door and drove the bolt home, and the storm was shut outside howling, and there was only the two of them in the small red light of the room. She worked fast, for the cold was the enemy now and not the man. She peeled the frozen cloak away, and beneath it his coat was ruined and dark with wet, but her chapped fingers knew good cloth when they felt it. This was no drover's coat, no farmer's Sunday best. The wool was fine and close woven, and the buttons under her thumb were horn and silver. Whoever he was a great deal more than he seemed face down in her snow. She built the fire higher than she had let it burn in weeks, feeding it bricks she could ill afford, because a dead guest cost more than peat. She fetched the smooth stones she kept warm at the hearth for her grandmother's old aches, wrapped them in flannel, and packed them close along his sides. She chafed his great, cold hands between her own, and it was then that she felt the ring. It sat on the smallest finger of his left hand, a heavy band of dark gold, worn smooth with years, with a device cut into a flat, dark stone she could not read in the firelight. But she knew by the weight of it, and by the clean, deep cut of the carving, that it was the sort of thing that meant something, the sort of thing a man was born to and did not buy. She turned it once with the pad of her thumb, and then she let it be. It was not hers to wonder at. He shuddered. A long, deep, racking shudder ran the length of him, and that was good, she knew, for the ones past saving did not shiver. His eyes moved beneath their lids. His cracked lips parted. "Do not," he said. The word came rasping out of him, from far down and half out of his wits, and there was in it, even now, even broken as he was, the flat, unthinking habit of a man long used to being obeyed. Do not tell them. Do not tell them where. Then he was gone again, down into the dark, and Lynette knelt back on her heels in the firelight and looked at the stranger the storm had put into her keeping, and felt the first cold touch of a question she did not yet know how to ask. He burned through the night. The cold had very nearly killed him, but it was the fever that came after that. Lynette feared the more. It rose in him like a tide as the warmth crept back into his body, and by the small hours he was muttering and turning on the pallet before the fire, his skin gone from ice to a dry and frightening heat. She did what her grandmother had taught her. She bathed his brow and his throat with cool water and willow, worked a little of her fever draught between his cracked lips, and cleaned the gash above his eye and bound it with clean linen torn from her own second shift. The wound above his brow had not been got by any fall. She had dressed enough hurts to know the difference. It was a clean, straight cut, the kind a blade makes. And when she had eased his ruined coat from him to work, she found the rest of it, a great blackening bruise across his ribs, grazes on his knuckles, the sort a man earns giving blows as well as taking them. Whatever had befallen this man on the road above her cottage, He had not simply lost his way in the snow. Someone had wanted him down. Her old dog Moss lay by the hearth, gray muzzle on his paws, watching the stranger with the grave patience of a beast too old to be troubled by much. Now and then he thumped his tail against the flags, as though to tell her she was not, after all, entirely alone with her fear. Toward dawn, the fever broke. She must have slept, for she woke stiff and aching in the chair by the fire, with the gray light of a snowbound morning at the window, and she woke because she was being watched. He was awake. He lay very still, but his eyes were open and fixed upon her, and they were not the eyes of a man half dead in a drift. They were dark and clear and coldly awake, moving over her, over the room, over the bolted door and the single window and the poor scrubbed poverty of all she owned, taking the measure of it in the space of a breath. She had the sudden sense of being read like a page held to the light. "Where is this?" he said. It was not quite a question. His voice had come back to him, low and rough, and there was no please in it anywhere. "My cottage," Linnet said. "On Caldfell, above Nethercot. You came over the top in the storm and went down in the snow. I brought you in." She did not rise from her chair. She had learned long ago that you did not show a frightened animal. You were frightened too. "You have a fever, a cut above your eye, and 3 cracked ribs, I think, and not broken. You will live." Which an hour later I could not have promised you. Something moved behind his eyes at that. He was silent a while, weighing her, and she felt the whole force of his attention like a flat hand laid against her chest. "Who else knows I am here?" he said. "No one. There is no one to know. I live alone." He let out a slow breath, and the terrible tension went out of his shoulders. He had been ready, fever and cracked ribs and all, to come up off that pallet, fighting had her answer been otherwise. This was not a man who feared much, but he feared that. "What is your name?" he asked. "Linnet Carew, and yours?" The pause was a heartbeat too long. "Rook," he said. It was a lie, and she knew it the way she knew a false coin by its weight, and he saw that she knew, and did not much care. A man did not wear a ring like his and answer to a name plucked from a hedge. But she had spent her life among people who kept their secrets close, and had no wish to go digging in his. "Well then, Rook," she said, and rose to see to the fire. Moss got up with a groan and crossed the floor and put his gray head against the stranger's hand where it lay upon the blanket. Linnet drew breath to call the dog off, for Moss was old and she could not bear to lose him. But the man's hand had already turned, and instead of thrusting the animal away, he laid it, very gently, on the old dog's head, and rubbed once behind the ragged ear in the exact place a dog most wants to be touched and can never reach. Moss sighed and leaned his whole weight against the pallet, as though he had known this man the length of his life. Linnet watched, and something in her chest that had been drawn tight since first she saw the ring eased by a single notch. Whatever the county might say of a man, she had never yet known a dog to be wrong about one. The stranger caught her looking. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "You are worn to the bone," he said at last, and it was not an accusation, and it was not pity. It was only the plain truth, as though he were reading it off her, the way she had read his hurts off him. "You sat up the whole night with a stranger, a great brute of a man come out of the dark who might have been anything at all." He looked at the fire built, higher than her few bricks could bear, at the bare place at her table where she had plainly gone without, so that a dead guest might not cost her his life on top of everything else. "Why?" "Because you would have died," Linnet said simply. "And I am not yet so poor that I will let a man freeze on my own doorstep to spare myself the peat." He looked at her a long moment more. "What?" Then he said very low, "You should be more afraid of me than you are." And there it was. Not a threat, a warning. A thing said by a man who knew to the marrow what it was to be feared, and who, for reasons she could not begin to guess at, did not wish to be feared by her. The storm did not lift for 3 days. The snow fell, and then it froze, and then it fell again, and the drifts rose against the north wall of the cottage, until the little window went dark at midday. There was no question of the stranger leaving, even had he been fit to, and he was not. The cracked ribs held him to slow, shallow breaths and slower movements, and the fever had left him weak as a new lamb, a thing that plainly galled him past all bearing. He was a man made to do, and being made to lie still in a poor woman's cottage while she carried broth to him was a torment that had nothing to do with his ribs. She fed him what she had, which was little. Oat porridge, a thin barley broth, with the last of the salt bacon shredded into it for strength, hard cheese, and harder bread. She gave him the greater share without remark, and ate her own small portion without apology, and if he marked it, at first he said nothing. On the second day he marked it. "You are giving me your food," he said. She had set the bowl by him and turned away, and his voice stopped her where she stood. "You are the one mending," she said. "You have the greater need of it. You have been eating the half of what you give me. Less than the half." He watched her with that same reading look, and she understood how little escaped this man, weak as he was. "A woman does not grow as thin as you are in a house, with food enough in it." "No," Linnet agreed, "she does not." She saw no cause to lie about it. "It has been a hard winter, and I am one pair of hands, and my grandmother is 3 months in the churchyard. I will manage, I always have." He was quiet. Then, to her surprise, he pushed the bowl back across the little table toward her. "Then we will share it," he said. "I will not mend the faster for starving the woman who is mending me. Eat, Linnet Caro. I find I have no stomach for being a burden on top of being a stranger." It was the first time he had spoken her name. And there was something in the saying of it, some rough and unpracticed gentleness that she felt in a place she had thought long since gone numb. They talked. After that, through the long, white, idle hours, there was nothing else to do anything with. Or rather, she talked, and he listened, and gave back little. And yet, the little he gave began by slow degrees to warm. He had a dry way about him when it came at all. A black-cornered humor that startled a laugh out of her the first time, a sound so long unheard in that cottage that Moss lifted his head in alarm. When she begged pardon for the meanness of the fare, he told her gravely that he had eaten far worse at the tables of men who could have fed a whole parish, and that a barley broth given freely sat better in a man than a swan served up by an enemy. "You speak as though you have sat at a great many tables you did not care for," she said. "I have sat at a great many tables," he said, "and cared for almost none of them, and for none of the men across them. It is a particular loneliness, Mistress Caro, to be always in a full room and never once in company." He said it lightly, the way a man says a thing he does not mean to have heard, and then he looked into the fire and said no more. Linnet knew that loneliness. She had lived it up here on the fell her whole life, needed and feared in the same breath, wanted for her hands, and never for herself. She did not say so, but something passed between them in the firelight all the same, quiet as the snow, a recognition. Two creatures who had each learned the same hard shape of being apart. When she asked, careful as walking on river ice, whether there was anyone who might be looking for him, anyone she could get word to, his face closed like a door on a cold room. There were a great many people looking for him, he said, and not one of them wished him well, and she would do him a kindness to get word to none of them at all. On the third day, with the light failing, she took up his ruined shirt to see whether it might be saved, for good linen was not a thing to throw away. And there, at the hem, half hidden in a fold, her fingers found the stitching. Not a laundry mark. A small device worked in white silk thread, so fine she had to hold it to the firelight to make it out. A bird with its wings spread wide, and beneath it, in the same near-invisible thread, a shape she did not know for any honest letter, but knew all the same for what it was. A crest. She sat very still with the shirt in her lap. She thought of the ring and the fine close coat and the flat way he gave an order and expected the world to move to it. She did not know his name, but she was no longer certain she wished to. Across the room he had fallen at last into a true and healing sleep, the hard lines of his face gone soft with it, so that he looked less like a man the world might have cause to fear, and more like a boy who had been a very long time cold. Lind folded the shirt with its hidden bird and set it by. And she sat a while in the dark with her old dog's head heavy across her foot, and understood, with the clear, cold honesty she brought to all things, that for the first time since her grandmother died she was not lonely. It frightened her a great deal more than the stranger ever had. By the 4th day he could sit up without the breath going out of him, and by the 5th he had begun to prowl the 4 short walls of her cottage like a wolf too long kept in a pen. The snow had stopped, though the sky had gone the hard pale color that only promises more. It was into that lull that Grisel Sowerby came toiling up from Nethercot for the cough draught Linnet made her every winter. Linnet met her at the door and did not ask her in, but stood with it drawn close at her back, her heart going hard, praying the old woman could not see past her to the great dark stranger by the fire. Grisel had not, but Grisel had news, and loved above all things to be the one to carry it. "There has been a man in the village," she said, her breath smoking in the cold. "2 men. Gentlemen's servants by their coats." Though there was nothing gentle in the way they went about their asking, Linnet kept her face still, the way she kept it still, over a child she could not save. "And what did they want?" she asked, as though it were nothing to her. "Word of a traveler, a gentleman," they said, "lost off the high road in the storm. A great tall dark man, wounded belike. They are offering silver, Linnet, good silver, to any soul that can say where he has got to." And they went door to door with it, and they did not ask kindly. The old woman leaned nearer, though there was no creature on all that white fell to overhear. "And Jory, my sister's boy, says one of them let slip who it is they hunt. He says it is the Duke himself, the Duke of Ravenmoor." The name dropped into the cold between them, and Linnet felt it go down her spine like meltwater. Every soul in the valley knew it, though few had seen the man. He was the dark tale mothers frightened their children with, the lord of the Black House 40 miles east, who had buried a young wife and never taken another, and who had, it was whispered, killed men with his own hands and never answered for it. The Duke, everyone feared, and yet even as the old dread moved through her, her practical mind was already finding it wanting. It made no sense. Great lords did not ride the high fells alone in a blizzard with no servant at their back, nor get dragged from their horses and left for the snow to bury like a poacher in a ditch. And who in his wits would send hired blades to murder the highest man in 40 miles and hope to spend the silver after the wounded traveler? Those men wanted was real enough, and warming his ribs at her hearth this hour, but the Duke was boys' talk, and she would not trouble a sick man with it. She got Grisel her draft, and sent her down the hill with a lie about a quiet winter. Then she went in, shut the door, and set her back against it. "Rook," she said. He had heard. Of course he had heard. He sat with his great scarred hands loose between his knees, and there was no surprise in his face, only a grim confirming, as though a thing long awaited had come round at last. "How many?" he said. "2, going door to door, offering silver for word of a wounded traveler lost in the storm. They are paying good coin, and they are not paying it kindly. No," he said softly, "they would not be. They want me dead." He did not insult her by pretending otherwise, and she was grateful for it in a bleak way. "I was set upon on the high road 4 nights before you found me, pulled down off my horse. They meant it quick, and the storm to hide it, and it very near was. Had the drift taken me 20 paces sooner, or had you let your curtain fall, they would have had their wish. They will not stop for having failed once. They will hunt until they have a body to be sure of, and now they are within a morning's walk of your door. Lynette thought of the silver. She was too honest not to. More than she would see in 10 hard winters. Enough to mend the roof and lay in peat, and never again lie awake at the arithmetic of a lone woman with nothing between her and the cold. All she need do was walk down the hill and open her mouth. He was watching her think it, and named it before she could. You could tell them, he said. You could earn your silver and be warm the whole winter through, and not a soul on this earth would call you wrong for it. You owe me nothing. I would think no less of you. I would even understand it. Lynette held his gaze a long moment. I do not sell people, she said, and I do not trust men who go door to door with silver and no kindness. Whatever you are, Rook, those men are not your friends, and I will not hand a living soul to their like for all the silver in the county. She knelt to the fire out of habit, then remembered the smoke and stopped with a brick in the air. You will stay until you can travel and stand and hold your own ground. You will keep hidden, and I will tell whoever asks that I have seen no one, which heaven forgive me, is the first lie I have told and meant in years. And you will do exactly as I bid you while you mend, for I have kept you alive this far and have no mind to lose the argument now. Something moved in the stranger's hard face. That ghost of the black dry humor, and beneath it something very nearly like wonder. You are giving me orders, he said. I am the healer. You are the patient. Under this roof, that is the only rank that signifies. He laughed. It cost him with the ribs, and he pressed a hand to his side and laughed all the same, low and rough and real, and Moss thumped his tail on the flags at the sound of it. Very well, Mistress Caro. I am yours to command. Then, more quietly, the humor gone out of it, you are the most clear-eyed creature I have met in longer than I can say. You have kept a man alive on barley broth and your grandmother's leaves, where half the physicians in London would have bled him into his grave. When I am able, I will see you are not the poorer for it. That is my word, and whatever else the world tells you of me, my word is the one thing I have never broken. They settled the rest that afternoon plainly. He would keep from the window, and she would go on as always, and if any came, asking the cottage held nothing but a poor healer and her old dog. When the roads opened and his strength returned, he would go and settle whatever black account had set 2 blades on the road at his back. It was only after full dark, when she went out for an armful of bricks and stood a moment in the bitter, clean air, that the last of it came to her. She turned and looked back at her own small cottage, hunched low against the white shoulder of Coldville, and from its chimney, rising straight into the still and freezing night, went a thin gray ribbon of smoke. The only smoke, the only living mark on all those empty miles of snow. A signal any hunter with eyes might read from the valley floor. Lynette stood in the cold a long while looking up at it. Then she went in and did not tell him, and lay awake past the small hours, listening to the fell, and to the deep even breathing of the hunted man by her fire, and to the wide silence beyond her door that was not, she understood now, entirely empty after all. The days that followed settled into a rhythm, neither of them troubled to name. His strength came back by inches. First he could cross the room without the wall to steady him. Then he could split the kindling she never had time for, favoring his ribs, saying nothing of the pain, though she saw it in the set of his jaw, and dosed his evening broth with willow whether he asked it or no. He did not know how to be idle. Trapped in a small cottage with a woman who worked from dark to dark, he began, clumsily at first, and then, with a kind of grim satisfaction, to work beside her. It was a strange thing to watch a man with a signet ring hidden in his shirt learn to bank a peat fire and carry water from the frozen beck and mend the coop the wind had torn. He did it badly, and then he did it well. And he never once complained when the water sloshed down his front the first time, and she laughed before she could stop herself. He only looked at her with that dry amber glint, and said that no one had dared laugh at him in a very long while, and that he had missed it more than he could say. One evening, when the wind had dropped and the fire threw its light kindly on the walls, he asked her out of a long, comfortable silence how she had come to be alone. She told him plainly, for she had never learned any other way of telling a thing. Her mother dead of a fever when she was small. Her father a drover who had gone over a fell edge in the fog one autumn and never been carried home. Her grandmother who had raised her and taught her the whole of her art and been the entire world to her, gone in the back end of the year with her hand in Linnet's own. She did not tell it for pity, and he did not offer her any, and that, she thought, was the very reason she found she could tell it at all. He listened the way he did everything, now gravely and wholly, as though her small hard history were a thing worth the careful hearing. When she had done, he was quiet a while. Then he said only, "You have buried every soul that ever kept you warm, and still you walked out into a blizzard for a stranger." It was not a question, and she did not answer it, but the saying of it stayed with her long after the fire had burned down to its embers. They did not speak again of what he was, or of the men below with their silver. It sat with them all the same, a third thing at the fire, but for those short days they let it be. Then, on the 7th night, someone came pounding at the door. The cold had teeth that night. Linnet was on her feet with the poker in her hand before the second blow landed, and the stranger had come up off the pallet, fast and silent, and set his back to the wall beside the door, where he could not be seen. A thing so practiced and so quietly deadly that for one breath she believed every tale the valley told of the man they hunted. But the voice through the door was a boy's, high and broken. "Mistress Carroll, for the love of God, it is my ma'am." She knew it. Young Tom from the Low Farm, 2 miles down through the drifts, and under the fear in his voice, she heard the other thing, the thing that empties a house, and she was reaching for her bag before the door was open. His mother was 3 days in her labor, and the child would not come. The Nethercott midwife was snowed off across the beck. His father was near mad with it. Linnet dragged on her cloak. She looked once at the stranger, a question and a warning in the same glance, and he was already reaching for the ruined cloak she had failed to save, and could not bring herself to burn, pulling the hood of it low over his face. "You are not fit," she said. "I am fit enough to carry a bag and hold a lantern," he said, "and I am not fit to sit by your fire while you cross a night fell alone with 2 blades, hunting a body. One of us will lose that argument, Mistress Carroll, and it will not be me." And there was no time, so it was settled. The Low Farm was a single tallow light in an ocean of dark. Inside it was heat and terror and the low animal sound of a woman who has been in agony too long to scream. Linnet took one look, and the whole of her changed. The outcast, the thin woman who went without, the woman the valley crossed itself against, was gone, and in her place stood the only calm thing in that room. She washed. She turned back the blankets and laid her hands on the laboring woman and felt what was wrong at once. The child lying crossways, its shoulder come first, the way that killed both mother and babe if it was left. She did not let a shred of it into her face. She spoke low and steady, the same voice she had used on a dying man in the snow, telling the woman she was strong, that it was nearly done, that she must do only as she was bid. And she set her hands to the terrible, patient work of turning a child that did not wish to be turned. It took the better part of an hour. The stranger held the light where she told him, and fetched the water she called for, and said not one word, and when at the last she got the child come right, and drew it red and squalling into the world, and then stopped the mother's bleeding with hard steady pressure, and a poultice of her grandmother's making, the farmer fell to his knees and wept. Linnet did not weep. She cleaned her hands and gave her quiet orders for the woman's care, and wrapped the new daughter, and set her at her mother's breast. Only then, turning, did she see the stranger's face. The hood had fallen back without his knowing. He was staring at the child, at the living mother, and there was on his hard face something she had never seen there, something torn wide open, a grief so old and so deep that she looked away from it at once, the way you look away from a man undressed. He mastered it in a moment, but she had seen, and she understood, without a single word passing between them, that somewhere behind this man was a woman who had gone into that same dark and not come back, and a child that had gone with her, and no healer at the door to turn the fates. The farmer would have pressed on her everything he owned, which was little enough: a cheese, a sack of oats, the silver button off his own good coat. She took the oats, because pride never yet filled a belly, and she had learned that lesson young, and refused the rest, and told him to send up to her at once if the fever came. Then she gathered her bag, and the stranger took up the lantern, and they went out into the cold. They walked back up the fell in the gray, before the dawn, without speaking, the new light coming thin and blue over the drifts. At her own door he stopped her with a hand that did not quite touch her arm. "You should have been born to 100 lives in your hands," he said roughly, "and a warm house, and never gone hungry a day. Instead you are here going without your own supper for people who cross themselves at your shadow." He shook his head. "The world is a badly kept reckoning, Linnet Caro. It owes you a very great deal." She had no answer for that, and so she did not tell him what she had seen in his face over the cradle. But she carried it into the cottage with her, and it would not leave her, and neither, she was beginning to fear, would he. The child at the low farm lived, and the mother lived, and by the way of small places the tale of it ran down the valley faster than any horse could have carried it. The healer on Caldville had turned a crossways babe that would have killed them both. In a kinder county it might have softened the old fear of her. In this one it only sharpened it. A woman who could pull the living from the jaws of death, had commerce with something, and the same mouths that blessed her name over the new babe murmured it again over their shoulders on the road home. Linnet had long since stopped minding. She minded now because the tale had another listener, for it did not travel alone. Tom's father, in his gratitude and his cups, had told the taproom at Nethercott how the healer had come through the storm with a great tall fellow at her side, hooded and silent and strong as an ox, who held the lantern steady while she worked her miracle. It was nothing. It was everything. And 2 men who had been buying drinks in that taproom for a fortnight, waiting on exactly such a nothing, set down their cups and asked, very pleasantly, the way up to Caldfell. They came in the middle of the afternoon, when the light was flat and blue on the snow. Moss heard them first and stood stiff-legged at the door with a growl rolling in his old chest. The stranger was at the woodpile behind the cottage, and Linnet got to him in 3 strides. "2 men on the path," she said, coming up. She watched the change come over him. Not fear, a cold and terrible readiness. The readiness of the man who had come up out of the snow prepared to fight with 3 cracked ribs. His hand went to his belt, where no sword hung, and she saw him remember that, and saw the reckoning run quick behind his eyes. "How far?" he said. 5 minutes, no more." There was nowhere to run on an open fell. There was only the cottage. And the cottage had 1 room and a low loft under the thatch where her grandmother had dried her herbs. She pointed. He did not argue, which frightened her more than anything else could have, for it told her how ill he judged the odds. He went up the ladder fast and silent despite the ribs and drew the hatch cover over, and she kicked the pallet blankets into the corner and set the second bowl back on its shelf and had the kettle swung over the fire and her own hands steady around a bunch of dried tansy by the time the knock came. She opened the door with the flat, incurious face. She gave the world 2 men, town men, wrong for the fell in their good coats and their bad boots, one broad and red-faced, the other lean, with a wet cough. He could not master, and his left arm held stiff and close against his side. "Mistress Caro," said the broad one, and smiled the healer. "We have heard such things of you. You have heard I sell cough draughts." Linnet said, "That one behind you has need of one, by the sound of him. 3 pence. and I will not trouble to ask why 2 gentlemen's men are climbing my fell in the dead of winter. It threw him, her plainness. They were men used to being feared, and got none of it from her. The lean one coughed, and the broad one recovered his smile. "A traveler," he said. "We seek a traveler, mistress. A great, tall, dark man, lost off the road in the storm some weeks past. We have reason to think he came this way, and we hear you were seen, only 3 nights gone, with just such a man at your side. You heard of the birth at the Low Farm," Linnet said. "Half the Dale was at that birth, by the telling of it now. It grows a man taller with each mouth it passes through." She let a thread of contempt into it. "The man at my side was Tom's uncle, come down from Kendal for the winter, and he went home to his own hearth 2 days since, and if you want him, you may walk to Kendal, and welcome now. Do you want the draft, or do you want to stand in my doorway letting all my heat out onto the snow?" The lean one wanted the draft, and more than that. The arm he held so close was not right, and when she said flatly that she would look at it for another 3 since he was plainly no use to anyone coughing his lungs onto her step, he came in almost gratefully, and the broad one came with him, and there was a bad moment when the broad one's eyes went round the single room, over the 2 chairs, over the size of the hearth, up toward the dark square of the loft hatch. Moss stood in the middle of the floor and stared straight up at the loft and growled, low and steady, and Linnet's heart stopped in her chest. "Old fool of a dog," she said, and cuffed him gently and set him by the fire. "He growls at the roof. There is a marten got into the thatch, and it has driven him half wild this fortnight. Sit then, and let me see the arm. It was a wound." She had known it before ever he took off his coat, a deep gash along the forearm, days old, gone hot and angry at the edges, the kind a man takes turning a blade off himself in the dark. She cleaned it and did not remark upon it, and while she worked, the lean man, loosened by the warmth and the ale still in him, and the sweet relief of hands that did not hurt, began, as hurt men do, to talk. His mate should let him rest, he said, instead of dragging him up and down these cursed hills, after a dead man in the snow. A fortnight of cold, wet nothing it had been. And for what, he should like to know. The pay had been good going in, but it went sourer the longer it ran, and the one who had set them on had a short way with men who failed him, a lordly sort of way, and if his grace wanted the business finished so badly, he might come up onto these fells and see to it himself. The broad one said his name, once, sharp, and the lean one shut his mouth. But Linnet had heard enough. His grace, the one who set them on. A lordly man with a short way and a long reach, who wanted a great, tall, dark traveler dead in the snow and no body ever found. She kept her eyes on the wound and her hands steady, and her face a healer's blank, and inside her the last of her disbelief went out like a snuffed candle. She sent them off, with the draft and a salve and instructions the lean man would never follow, and she stood in the door and watched them go down into the blue dusk, and did not move, until they were small, and then gone. Then she went in and bolted the door and leaned against it, and looked up at the loft. The hatch lifted. His face came down out of the dark, and it was the face of a man who had heard every word. "You should not have healed him," he said quietly. "I heal who comes to my door," Linnet said. "It is the one thing in all my life no one has ever taken from me, and I will not have it taken now, not even for you." Her voice was steadier than she felt. "They will not come back tonight. He will be feverish by morning with that arm, and glad enough to lie by a fire in Nethercot and curse your name from a safe distance." He came down the ladder slowly and crossed to her, and stood close, closer than the small room made needful, and looked down at her, and there was something working in his face that had nothing to do with the men on the fell. "You lied for me," he said, "2 armed men without a tremor. You gave them a village and a dead uncle from Kendal as though you had kept it ready these 10 years. "I have been managing dangerous men at my door all my life," Linnet said. Why, yours are only better dressed, he laughed. Low, and then he stopped laughing. His hand came up, and this time it did touch her, the backs of 2 fingers against her cold cheek, and neither of them moved for a long moment. When this is done, he said, and it will be done, and soon, for I am near strong enough now to finish it, there is a thing I must tell you, a thing you will not thank me for. And I find I would sooner face those 2 and a dozen more than say it, and watch your face change. Then, say it now, Linnet whispered, and let it be over. No, he said. Let me have one more night before you know what I am. And he stepped back, and the moment closed like water over a stone, and neither of them slept. He told her the next night, with the fire low and the wind quiet for once, and the telling took the shape of a man setting down a weight he had carried so long he had forgotten it could be set down at all. He had married young, he said. A love match, which was rare enough in his world to be remarked upon, and rarer still to be envied. Her name had been Aileen. She had been quick and bright and unafraid, and she had looked at the grim young lord the county was already learning to whisper about, and seen, so she told him, a man worth the digging out. For 3 years she had been the one warm room in a cold and echoing house. And then she had died, bringing their child into the world, on a night not so unlike the one lately at the Low Farm, in a great cold house with 3 London physicians and attendants who bled her and argued their Latin across her bed, while she and the babe slipped quietly away between them. He had stood in the corridor, the Duke of Ravenmore, the highest man in 40 miles of country, and been permitted to do precisely nothing. There had been no healer with quiet, certain hands to reach in and turn the child and stem the bleeding. There had been only rank and money and 3 learned men who knew everything in the world except the one thing that mattered, and by the gray of the morning he had lost the whole of what he loved in the only life he was given. The county made its own tale of it, the way counties do, out of the little they saw and the great deal they imagined. A young wife, dead, and a husband who shut his gates and turned savage with grief, and could not bear the sight of a living soul who was not her. Someone whispered that he had done away with her, for a rich man's sorrow is never allowed to be only sorrow. Someone always whispers. And he had found, in the black years that came after, that he had not the smallest wish to correct them. Let them fear him. Fear kept them off, and off was the only place he could bear to have the world. A man believed a monster is a man left alone, and being left alone was the single mercy he still wanted. So he had fed the story, with his silence, year upon year, until it grew teeth and claws of its own, until mothers frightened their children quiet with his name, until he was no longer a man at all, but a dark shape on a hill that the valley told itself stories about on winter nights. And that, he said, looking into the fire, and not at her, is the whole truth of the Duke of Ravenmore. The name went through Linnet, like the blade that had marked him. For a long moment she could not speak the ring. The crest, a bird with its wings spread wide. The bearing no fever had ever quite stripped from him, the habit of command worn close as his own skin. Gristle on the step with her news. The Duke of Ravenmore, the Black House, 40 miles east, the buried wife, the man everyone feared. She had held the truth in her own 2 hands, had turned it with her thumb by the firelight, and had talked herself out of it because it was too great and too strange a thing to be lying half dead in her snow. And he had let her. Night upon night he had watched her build her small, sensible arguments against the truth of him, and he had said nothing at all, and let her name it boys' talk. But she thought of all the small kindnesses of the past days, and saw how each of them now wore a second face. The way he gave an order, and then caught himself and gentled it. The fine linen and the horn and silver buttons, she had told herself, must belong to some prosperous merchant's son. The men with silver going door to door, and she standing on her own step reasoning, so carefully, so cleverly, that a duke could not possibly be lying in her cottage, because it was easier to keep him if he was only a man. She had not been deceived by him. She saw now half so much as she had helped him to deceive her, because the truth would have taken him away. "You let me," she said. Her voice did not sound like her own. "Grisel spoke your name on my own doorstep, and I stood in this room and reasoned that you could not be him. And you sat there by my fire and let me. Yes. Why? Because for 11 days, he said, and now he did look at her. I was not the Duke of Ravenmore. I was a man called Rook, that a woman had pulled out of the snow. I have not been only a man since I was 22 years old, Linnet. I did not know how badly I wanted it back until you gave it to me without knowing you had. And I was a coward, and I did not want it to end, and every day I did not tell you was one more day I got to keep it." He drew a slow breath. "That was wrongly done. You had every right to know whose death you were risking your neck for. I am sorry for it. I am not often sorry, and I am very bad at the saying of it, but I am sorry for that." Linnet rose and went to the window and looked out at the dark. She was a healer on a fell with an old dog and a grandmother 3 months in the ground, and next to nothing to her name, he was the greatest man in 40 miles of country. She had washed his shirt and shared her broth and lain awake, glad, heaven help her, glad that he was under her roof. And all the while he had been as far above her as the moon over the frozen beck, and she had not known enough even to be ashamed of hoping. "You should have let me go on thinking you a lost gentleman," she said. "I could have borne that. A gentleman might have stayed." She stopped, appalled at what had come out of her mouth. "Might have what?" he said behind her, nearer than she had known. "It does not signify. Dukes and healers do not signify to one another. You will mend, and you will go and settle your account, and you will send me silver by the hand of a servant, and you will have forgotten the cottage on Caldwell by the summer. That is the shape of it. I have known the shape of it since I first felt that ring on your hand. I only let myself forget it a while. Linnet, look at me." She turned. He was near enough to touch, and there was nothing of the Duke in his face, nothing of the monster, only the man from the snow. And he was looking at her the way she had once looked at a thing too great to be lying there in her power. "I have been feared and flattered, and bowed to by better liars than those two on the fell," he said low. "And not one of them ever once looked at me the way you looked at me before you knew. You did not pity me, and you wanted nothing from me. You gave me your fire and your food and your grandmother's medicine, and told me I was your patient and you were the healer, and that was the only rank that signified. It is the truest thing anyone has said to me in 20 years, and I will not stand here and let you tell me it does not signify. It cannot come to anything, and you know that better than I do." "I know exactly what it cannot come to," he said. "Let me have it anyway. One moment of it, before the rest of the world comes back and tells us both what we are." And he kissed her. Or she kissed him. Afterward, neither of them could have said which, and it did not matter, for the fire and the small warm room and the two of them within it were for one moment the whole world, and the moon, and the beck and the 40 miles and the black account, and the two men on the fell all fell away to nothing at all. It was Moss who ended it. The old dog came up off the hearth with a sound she had never heard him make, not the martin growl, not the warning for the men on the path, but a deep and rising bay of true alarm. And, beneath it, through the thin cold walls, came a sound that belonged to no night on Caldwell. Hooves, many hooves, and the jingle of harness, and men's voices carrying hard across the frozen ground. He went to the window. She saw his whole body change, saw the man from the snow put away and the Duke come back into him like a sword sliding home into its sheath. "How many?" she whispered. "Enough," he said. "He has come himself." Of course he has. He would want to see it done with his own eyes. He turned to her, and his face was terrible and calm together. "Linnet, whatever I am about to become in this room, in the next hour, I need you to remember that you knew me before it. Whatever you see me do, the knock, when it came, was not a knock. It was a boot against the door, hard enough to jump the bolt in its bracket. Open, or we break it down. I am told there is a healer here, who keeps a great tall man about her. Open the door." The voice was smooth and carrying, and used to obedience, and Linnet saw his jaw set at the sound of it. He put her behind him with one arm, and he drew the bolt himself, and he opened the door of her cottage to the night. 4 men stood in the snow with a lantern, and before them in a caped riding coat of fine dark wool stood a gentleman. He was younger than the man at her side, and slighter, with a handsome discontented face and pale eyes that Linnet knew, for she had seen their like carved into the stone of the ring. Kin, it was written in the very bones of him. He looked through Linnet as though she were a stick of furniture, and when his eyes found the man behind her, they went wide, and then, terribly delighted. "Cousin," he said, "you are alive. How very inconvenient of you." "Crispin," said the Duke. "Only the name." But Linnet felt the whole temperature of the room drop with it. Sir Crispin Vaunt stepped inside as though he owned the walls, drawing off his gloves 1 finger at a time, and his men crowded the doorway at his back, and the small room that had held 2 people, and a fire and a fragile new thing, was all at once full of the world and its blades. "I confess I had given you up," Crispin said. 3 weeks. I had begun to compose my grief. I had a black coat made against the news, and here you are, in a hovel, nursed by a wise woman." His lip curled at Linnet. "It is almost too perfect. The great Duke of Ravenmore run to earth in a shepherd's hut, and not a soul in the world knowing where he lies." "You sent them," the Duke said. "The men on the road. You paid them." "Of course I paid them," Crispin said, impatient, as though the point were tediously plain. "You would not have the decency to marry again, nor to die of your sulking, nor to break your neck on one of those black horses you dote upon. Do you know what it is, cousin, to be always next and never it, to wait and wait upon a man who has made a religion of grief and shows no sign of doing the one useful thing left him, which is to hand the title to someone who will trouble to enjoy it?" He smiled. "I merely hurried a stubborn stream toward the sea." Linnet stood very still against the wall. She had heard men threaten in her doorway the whole of her life. She had never heard anything like the cold pleasure in this soft young man's voice, the way he spoke of murder as a tiresome errand run on a cold day. And she understood, with a lurch that turned her stomach, that the monster of the valley's telling had stood these 20 years in the wrong body. The Duke everyone feared was not the man who had rubbed a dog's ragged ear and held her lantern and wept over a stranger's living child. The true monster had a handsome face and pale eyes and a black coat already made. "Send the woman out," Crispin said to his men with a flick of a glove. "She has seen a great deal too much, and she is nothing. Have her wait in the snow while the men and I conclude our business here." He got no further. The Duke moved. She had seen him ready before, the wolf against the wall, but she had never seen him let go, and there was no warning in it at all. One moment he stood between her and the door, and the next he had the nearest of Crispin's men by the wrist, had wrenched the drawn knife clean out of his grip and swept the fellow around in front of him as a shield, his own back to the wall so that none could come behind him, the whole of it inside a single breath, silent, without heat, with a dreadful economy that spoke of a great many nights in Spain the valley knew nothing of. "No one," said the Duke of Ravenmore very quietly, "sends her anywhere. This is her house. You are every one of you standing in it only because she has not yet told you to leave." His eyes found Crispin over the shoulder of the man he held. "You will want to be careful now, cousin, of what you say in front of the one person in this valley I would mind the losing of." And Linnet, pressed to the cold wall of her own cottage, did not stand there trembling and wait to be defended. Her hand had found the poker where it leaned by the hearth, and she took it up in a grip her years of hard work had made stronger than any of them would have guessed, and she set her shoulder to his, so that the man from the snow was not, in the end, holding that doorway quite alone. He felt her there. She saw it move across his face, a flicker of something that was almost a smile in the middle of all that danger, and she understood that she had never in the whole of her life been so completely defended, nor had she ever once, until this moment, defended anyone in return. Crispin's smile had gone. It came back thinner. "Brave," he said, "for a man with one borrowed knife and a wise woman with a fire iron. You cannot hold that grip forever. And when your arm tires, cousin, there are 4 of us, and a wounded ox is still only an ox, and afterward there is no one left to tell of it, and the tale reads as a duke lost in the snow, precisely as it was always meant to." He spread his empty hands. "You have won yourself a moment. You have not the men to win the hour." "No," the Duke agreed. "I have not the men." And then he smiled, and it was not a good smile, and Linnet felt the whole night turn upon its hinge. But I never once said that I came alone. For a moment nothing in the room moved. Crispin's pale eyes flicked to the black window, to the door, weighing the words for a bluff. "You are alone," he said. "You have been alone 3 weeks. There is no one." "There is no one I sent for," the Duke said. "Pah! You were right in that much. I could get no word out, hunted as I was, and I did not try. I had no need of it." He tightened his grip a fraction, and the man in his hold made a thin sound. "You have never understood it, Crispin, because no living soul would cross a winter pass to look for you. But I was 3 days overdue at Ravenmoor a fortnight past, and there is a man in that house named Halloway, who soldiered with me in Spain, and Halloway does not sleep while his master is unaccounted for. He has had riders in every pass and every tap room between here and the sea since the first night I did not come home." Crispin's face had begun, very slightly, to change. "And here is the part of it you will enjoy," the Duke went on, soft and terrible. "Do you know what finally told my men where to look? Not my cleverness, not my strength, hers." He did not turn his head, but the whole room felt the word land. "3 nights ago this woman healed a man who came bleeding to her door. She heals whoever comes. It is the one thing the world has never managed to take from her. She neither knew nor would have cared that the man she mended was one of the 2 you paid to cut me down. She cleaned his arm and eased his fever and sent him back down to sit by the fire in the Nethercot taproom. And a hurt man by a fire, cousin with ale in him and his pay come late, is a man who talks. He has been talking for 3 days. Of cold work on the fells, and a lordly paymaster with a short way, and a great dark traveler none of them could find. Outside, the hoofs had stopped. The voices had not. They were close now, and they were many, and they were spreading out around the cottage in the dark. "Your own hired blade led my men to this door," the Duke said, "by the road of a mercy shown to him by a woman you called nothing and meant to be rid of. That is the account, Crispin. That is how it comes to balance." The door burst inward, but it was not Crispin's men who came through it. It was a broad, gray-bearded man in a soldier's coat, with a drawn sword and snow melting on his shoulders, and behind him more and more, filling the doorway and the night beyond it, and Crispin's 4 turned and found themselves of a sudden the outnumbered ones, and one by one, at a small weary gesture from the Duke, they let their blades fall ringing to the flags of Linnet's floor. "Your Grace," said the gray-bearded man, and his rough voice broke on it, "God be thanked, we had near given you up for lost." "Not you, Halloway," said the Duke. "You never gave anything up in your life. It is your very worst quality." And something passed between the 2 old soldiers that was far too large for the size of the words. Sir Crispin Vaunt stood alone in the middle of the small room, his gloves still in his hand, and watched his neat murder come apart around him. He did not run. There was nowhere on all that white fell for a man to run to. He drew himself up and reached absurdly for the last rag of his dignity. "I am the heir of Ravenmoor," he said. "You are the man who tried to murder the Duke of Ravenmoor," said the Duke, "before a healer, a steward, 4 bought men who will each of them buy back his own neck by naming you, and a hired blade who has been telling the whole of it to a tap room for 3 days together. You are the heir of nothing now, Crispin. You are a rope that has not yet been tied." He turned from his cousin as though the man had already ceased to exist, and looked instead at Linnet. "Take him," he said to Holloway, "alive. The law will want him, and I find, tonight, that I would far rather the law had him than I. I am weary to the bone of being the monster of this valley. Let a courtroom be the terrible thing for once, and not me." They took Sir Crispin Vaunt out into the snow. And it was over, as swiftly and as strangely as it had begun, and Linnet stood in her own small cottage, all at once crowded with soldiers and lantern light, and did not yet know that the hardest part of the night was still before her. The soldiers did not stay long. There was a hired man to be found in Nethercot, and a prisoner to be got down off the fell before the weather closed again, and Holloway, once he had satisfied himself with his own 2 eyes that his master was whole, was brisk and grim and gone, promising a proper escort by first light, leaving 2 men at the foot of the path, and taking the rest and Sir Crispin away into the dark. And then, for the first time in an hour that had turned her whole world over, Linnet was alone with him again, with the Duke of Ravenmore, in the small red light of the room where 1 hour before he had kissed her, or she him, while he still half belonged to her. She busied herself at the fire so that she need not look at him. She heard him lower himself into the chair, heard the small grunt the ribs still drew from him, and the plain ordinariness of it, the human weariness of it, was almost more than she could bear. "You are the Duke of Ravenmore," she said to the flames. "I am." "Then there is nothing more for us to say tonight, your grace, and you should rest, for you have men coming at dawn to carry you back to your own life. I will make up the pallet, Linnet. You will send the silver you promised, and I will thank you for it will keep the roof on another winter, and I will tell my grandchildren, if ever I am fool enough to have any, that I once pulled a duke out of a snowdrift, and fed him barley broth, and never knew him. It is a fine tale. It will do me for the rest of my days. Stop." He was up out of the chair. "Stop talking to me about silver." She rounded on him, and she was angry now, which was a great deal easier to hold than the other thing. "What else is there? You are a duke. I am a healer, with a dog and a dead grandmother. An hour ago I forgot that. I stood in this room and I let you kiss me, and I forgot it entirely. Then your soldiers came through my door, and I remembered. That is what silver is for, your grace. It is the thing a great man sends so that he need not come himself. I have seen how your world mends its debts. It pays them, and it drives away, and it does not look back at the small houses on the hill. You have not seen how I mend mine," he said. "I have not, until this winter, had a single one worth the mending." He crossed the room and took her chapped, work-roughened hands into his great scarred ones, and held them fast when she tried to pull away. "I have been the Duke of Ravenmore for 20 years, he said, "and I have hated very nearly every hour of it. Do you know what the name has bought me? A wife dead, of the finest physicians money could hire, a house full of servants who flinch when I pass, a cousin who laid a knife on the road because a title was worth more to him than my living breath. That is what it is worth, Linnet. This thing you keep pushing back across the table like a bowl of broth, you will not take more than your share of. Do not make it harder than it already is. You told me that first day that under this roof the only rank that signified was healer and patient. You were right. You are always right. It is a maddening quality in a woman. So let me say it to you, as your patient, since that is a rank you will not argue with." He drew a breath, and the great feared Duke of Ravenmore, who had set 4 armed men's blades ringing to the floor with a gesture, looked all at once entirely uncertain of himself. "I do not want to send you silver. I want to come myself. I want to come every day for the rest of my life. I am asking you, and asking it very badly, for I have never done it before, and never once thought that I would, to let me stay. Not you carried off to my great cold house, frightened of the servants and the forks, me. Here, or wherever in the world you will have me, mending your coop and carrying your water and being laughed at when I spill it down my front. I have found that I am a far better rook than ever I was a duke. You are the one who taught me the difference between the two." Linnet's eyes were burning. "They will never allow it. A duke and a woman like me." "I am the Duke of Ravenmoor," he said, and for the first time and the last, she heard him take up the whole weight of the title, not as a burden but as a tool, fitted at last to his hand. "There is precisely one advantage to it, and I have found it out only now. No man alive can tell me whom I may love. Let them whisper. They have whispered these 20 years that I murdered one wife. Let them choke instead on the news that I have gone and married a healer who saves them and their children in the dark. I should take a very great pleasure in it. Married," she said faintly. "It is the custom," he said, "when a man has been so thoroughly rescued as I have." And then he did the thing that cost him more than the fight had, more even than the confession. "There is one gift left that you have never had of me," he said. "You have never had my name. Rook was a lie, but it was the nearest to the truth I could give you, for no living soul has called me anything but Ravenmoor, or your grace, in 20 years. It is Gideon. I should like it a very great deal if you would use it." I have near forgotten the sound of it in a kind mouth. Linnet looked at him a long moment, this great scarred man standing in her one small room, asking with his hands all but held out for the single thing his rank could not command. She thought of the shape in the snow she had so very nearly let the curtain fall upon. She thought of the thin gray ribbon of smoke rising from her chimney, the only living mark on all those empty miles of white, and of how it had turned out in the end to be no signal to her death at all but to the whole of the rest of her life. "You spill more water," she said, "than any grown man I have ever met. I do, and you will do exactly as I bid you, while you mend, and after." "I have found," said the Duke of Ravenmoor, "that I like nothing in the world half so well." "Then yes, Gideon," said Linnet Carrow, and the name felt strange and right in her mouth, like a key turned at last in a lock that had rusted shut for years. "Heaven help the both of us. Yes." The tale reached the county before the thaw did, and the county did not know what to make of it. The dark Duke of Ravenmoor, the monster of the eastern hills, was not dead in a ditch as his cousin had arranged, but alive, and of all the impossible things, betrothed. Sir Crispin Vaunt went down to the assizes in irons, and the 4 hired men bought their own lives by swearing away his, and the wounded man who had talked in a taproom talked again before a judge, and the telling of that new tale drove the old ugly one clean out of people's mouths. It is a hard thing to go on believing a man murdered his first wife while he is busy, in front of the whole county, marrying a woman who pulls its children living from the dark. They were wed in the spring, in the small grey church at the foot of Caldfell, when the frost had gone out of the ground, and the fell had turned almost overnight to a riot of new green and the hard, bright yellow of the gorse. Linnet did not go to a great house to be married. He came down to her valley. Grisel Sowerby wept in the front pew and told everyone within reach that she had always known, there was more to that healer than ever met the eye. Holloway gave the bride away and was gruff about it, and then not gruff at all. Moss, grey-muzzled and slow, slept through the whole of the service in a warm patch of sun by the door, and no one had the heart to wake him. They kept the cottage. He would not hear of selling it, though they lived, in the end, mostly at Ravenmoor, where a healer's hands proved worth a very great deal in a great cold house and a country of tenants who had never once been tended by a physician who did not first ask to see the color of their coin. But they came back to Caldfell often, and always in the deep of the winter, and on the worst nights when the wind came down off the high tops and threw itself against the walls as though it meant to have them out. They would sit together by the small fire in the small room where the whole of it had begun. "You should have let the curtain fall," he would tell her, as he told her every year. "I very nearly did," she would say. She always said it. "I know," he would answer, and take her hand. Kindness is a dangerous thing to give a stranger. And it was. It had cost her everything. She had once been the safe, cold, solitary shape of her, the woman who did not weep because weeping wasted good salt. She would not have a moment of it back. Outside, the snow would fall, patient and white, and burying the fell, and inside the fire would hold. And the great feared Duke of Ravenmore would sit warming his scarred hands at a pauper healer's hearth, exactly where a storm and a signet ring and one small act of mercy had put him, and there was nowhere in all the wide, cold world that he would rather be. Did Lynette and her duke's hard-won happiness warm you the way it warmed the two of them by that little fire? There is nothing in all the world quite like watching a good heart, worn thin by a cruel winter, finally receive the one thing it never let itself hope for, especially when it arrives wrapped in a scarred and formidable man who has to learn how to be laughed at. If this tender story of mercy and courage found a place in your heart, please tap that like button to help the channel grow. Share it with anyone who believes the kindest souls deserve the happiest endings. Detang. Subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss our next story, and tell me your favorite moment in the comments below.